Welcome to the 19 December 2024 edition of Continental Commandery's Maritime History Virtual Lecture Series. I'm Fred Passman and I'm your host. Since we started our program back in May of 2020, we've recorded presentations covering numerous Coast Guard, Marine Corps, Merchant Marine, and Navy topics. And you can find all of our past presentations by visiting the past presentations page of our Commandery's website, which you see scrolling below. Before I introduce this evening's speaker, I'll just say a few words about the Naval Order of the United States. The Naval Order is our nation's oldest ancestral organization dedicated to maritime history. Our mission is to preserve, promote, and celebrate U.S. maritime history and camaraderie amongst our companions. Anyone who has served in any of our maritime services or is a direct generation of the first or second generation is eligible to join the United States Naval Order of the United States. For more information, visit the Naval Order website and select how to join NOAS. Today's presentation is recorded on YouTube and will be available for viewing pretty much as soon as we end the recording. You can use the same link as the one you used to join us live. During the program, you'll be able to post questions to the comments box. Please feel free to do so. After Captain Crossland has completed his presentation, we'll have a question and answer period. At that time, I'll share your questions with him. Speaking of sharing, I've shared Captain Crossland's biography when I first introduced him in August and then again in October. So this evening, I'll just refer you to his biography that's in the lecture synopsis on the Continental Commandery's website. Captain Crossland is a companion of the New York Commandery. Good to see you again, Roger. It's been a long time. Haven't seen you since Tuesday. Roger and I sat together Tuesday evening during the New York Commandery's holiday dinner at the Tavern 76 in beautiful Tappan, New York. Just as a point of interest, since we're covering history, the Tavern 76 is the country's oldest tavern, built in 1668. It was also the site where Major John Andre was held while awaiting his trial for treason, involving another famous Revolutionary War figure, one Benedict Arnold. But I digress. New York Commandery had a great evening, but now it's time for us to hear about how the Battle of Pungdo Bay panned out and what its implications were in the years that followed. Roger, good to see you again, as I said, and I think in the interest of experience learned, I'm going to give you the deck and the con and let you pick up where you left off.
Well, very good. I missed seeing Brom Bones there on Hudson, but I think I was on the wrong side of the river. I think he hangs around with the headless horseman over in the other side. Well, good evening. The naval battle of Pungdo is in 3 parts. This is the third of the 3 parts. The first 2 parts are already on YouTube, and they address the Pungdo players, their motivations, and things that that have come to pass. If you haven't seen them, they'll be your homework assignment after Christmas. So a very good, a very short rehash. It is now 0730 on July 5th, July 1894. There are 3 Chinese warships, protected cruisers, Yoshino, Naniwa, and Akitsushima, coming up Korea's west coast. There are 2 Chinese warships, the cruiser Ji Yuan and the torpedo gunboat Kwang Yi, who are coming out of Asan on Korea's west coast. Nearby is a Chinese mail packet, So-Ching, passing by. It is not a true warship and will never fire a shot. Both squadrons are looking for both squadrons, the Chinese and the Japanese, are looking for the unescorted, neutral British schooner-rigged single-screw steam transport Kowshing, carrying 1,100 Chinese troops to Korea. It is bound for Asan, which is south of what is now known as Incheon on Korea's west coast. Now, here's an easy mnemonic for the players here. To remember the ships with 3 or more syllables are all Japanese, and all the ships with 2 syllables are Chinese. And one last mnemonic is pretend Kowshing means neutral. Initially, Kowshing is nowhere to be seen, but suddenly each squadron spots the other. I could see an imaginary referee flipping a giant imaginary coin, yelling, "Call." Japan's Commodore yells, "Heads." China's Commodore yells, "Tails." The referee pulls the flipped coin out of the water and confirms, "Heads." Japan yells, "We elect to field cruisers with 3 or more syllable names, slightly faster ships, slightly bigger guns, and standing orders that allow us to shoot first." China's Commodore nods sadly. China's standing orders throughout the Chinese fleet are do not fire the first shot at the Japanese. They engage China first. Japan engages China first. Yoshino and Naniwa enjoy 2-to-1 odds and seriously damage Ji-Yuan, its main guns, crumple its conning tower, and damage its steering linkage. Kwang Yi is so seriously mangled it beaches and then explodes. There, Akitsushima had the advantage. It was a protected cruiser and had a 5-syllable name. Then Yuan sights Kowshing and limps off towards the Kowshing and the Wei Highway Naval Station. The Japanese protected cruisers Yoshino, Naniwa, and Akutsushima follow. Now, remember, Part 2 YouTube addresses a more detailed view of this battle. We've wrapped up the battle, but not the very last part of the battle, which includes the sinking of the Kowshing. At 09:15 on July 25th, 1894, the Japanese cruiser Naniwa fires 2 shots across the merchant transport Kowshing's bow and directs Kowshing to heave to and to anchor. Once it does, Naniwa's boarding party searches the Kowshing. Meanwhile, the badly battered Chinese cruiser Ji-Yuan has passed both Kowshing and Naniwa and is headed to Wei Highway on China's Shantung Peninsula. When Kowshing, flying a neutral British Red Duster, is ordered to follow in Naniwa's wake, its British captain Galsworthy agrees to comply. However, the Chinese generals and their soldiers object and demand to be returned to a Chinese port, since China and Japan are not at war and Japan does not have authority over them. The Chinese troops stop Kowshing's crew from getting their ship underway. They will not agree to being taken captive. Chinese troops make threatening, throat-cutting gestures to the Kowshing's 7 British ship's officers. In 1894, there are no hard and fast Asian rules for treatment of prisoners. The historic samurai view of surrendering prisoners is they are subhuman cowards of no value to anyone. The historical samurai view is. Captain Togo, commanding chief of the Naniwa, comes from a samurai family and has served in the pre-Meiji Samurai Navy as a cadet. He has, however, the benefit of 7 years training with the British Royal Navy, which holds a less severe attitude towards prisoners. Historically, Royal Navy crews were entitled, especially during the Napoleonic Wars, entitled to a bounty known as head money, which made live enemy captives more lucrative than enemy fatalities. Kowshing's soldiers' passengers state they will rather die than surrender. The Chinese soldiers' fears are prescient. Japan will be accused of several massacres in this First Sino-Japanese War, including the Port Arthur massacre. Captain Togo and General von Hanneken, commanding general of the Chinese troops in Korea, attempt to negotiate, but after 3 hours, Togo won't budge. At 13:10, just short of 4 hours later, with the sun high in the sky, Japanese Captain Togo issues a surrender ultimatum that General von Hanneken and his chief Chinese generals must surrender their force. The ultimatum is emphatically rejected. The Japanese cruiser Naniwa signals Kowshing's British officers, quit or take the consequences. Anticipating negotiating loggerheads, Captain Calsworth has already given his men, but not his passengers, orders to be ready to jump overboard. Had there been side discussions between the Japanese and the British during those 4 deadlocked hours? It seems probable. There's already a special relationship between Japan and Britain. Britain hopes Japan will obstruct Russia's ambitions to wrest a warm water port on the Pacific from either Manchuria or Korea. In return, Japan is pleased with the material technical support it has received from the Royal Navy towards its 2.5-decade Korean conquest goal. At 13:10, Naniwa fires a single torpedo at a range of 145 yards, which fails to explode. Torpedoes were unreliable in 1894, but that may have been a purposeful signal to the British merchant crew. With that diversion, the members of Kowshing's crew, 7 British officers, 4 Filipino petty officers, and 64 Chinese crew members, all at once slip over the side and begin to swim for their lives. Chief Officer Tamplin, one of the 2 surviving British officers, mentioned in his Admiralty testimony that he had worn a life belt swimming to the Naniwa. No other lifeboats are mentioned in any account of the Kowshing incident, and swimming is not a widespread form of recreation in China at that time. Tiny geysers in this photo were fabricated. That's an old photo, and that was the way you used to substitute for Photoshop in those days. Kowshing's remaining Chinese soldiers are steadfast and use their issued rifles and ammunition to pick off Kowshing's fleeing officers and crewmen and their own swimming soldiers. 3 of the survivors, Captain Galsworthy, his chief officer Tamplin with his life belt, and Kowshing's Filipino bosun, are picked up by Naniwa's longboats. Those same longboats refused to rescue Chinese swimmers. Naniwa's light, quick-fire guns focused their fire on the Chinese swimmers and Kowshing's lifeboats and rafts. Naniwa unleashes a salvo with its secondary guns, smashing Kowshing's coal bunkers and generating an immense black cloud of dust. Nanawa then fires its main 10.2-inch guns, which cause one of the Kowshing's boilers to explode. This boiler explosion ignites the already airborne pulverized coal, resulting in a secondary explosion, blackening the sky. That explains the caption, "The day turned black as night." This is about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The Japanese ships cease firing at 13:47, a little over half an hour after initial firing of this disabled or dud torpedo. Spared by spars. General von Hanneken also goes over the side and takes 4 hours to swim a mile and a half to Takshan, nearby Takshan Island, where he is welcomed by the local Korean fishermen. There he finds 147 Chinese soldiers who have swum, rowed, or paddled their rafts to Takshan too. Kowshing's Takshan survivors are hustled off the Korean island by the non-belligerent German gunboat Iltis and the British torpedo cruiser Porpoise, and then are transported to Jefu on the Shantung Peninsula. The next day, the French gunboat De Leon rescues a Filipino bosun's mate and 40 Chinese, clinging to Kowshing's masts. That's what these are. Likely of wood construction, shown in this French illustration. I haven't been able to tell if the ship grounded. That side of the Yellow Sea is fairly shallow, but it doesn't. The ship is often called sunk, and yet this I see a deck here, but maybe that's an illusion. By this time, historian Olander estimates 1,123 Chinese soldiers and sailors have died or are dying. On the next day, July 26th, the Chinese cruiser Ji Huan arrives at Weihai Wei on Shantung Peninsula, and Captain Fang is controversially arrested for cowardice. Finally, on July 31st, the non-belligerent British torpedo cruisers Archer and Porpoise arrive to ferry the 71 survivors of the exploded torpedo gunboat Guangji and transport them from an island near Pungdo to Jefu on Shantung Peninsula. That same day, China declares war on Japan. Japan returns the courtesy with its own declaration of war on the next day, August 1st. Within 1 week, every major English-speaking newspaper in the world is angrily echoing the phrase Kowshing Massacre. 3 weeks too late, on August 21st, 1894, a new Japanese law establishes Japan's first prize court at Sasebo, Japan, to adjudicate matters related to capture ships, their crews, passengers, and contraband in wartime. In other words, they realized they made a mistake, and now they're going to they found the legal answer for next time. The timing of this unusual event is interesting. The uproar from the British public gives Japan pause, since most of its warships are still being built in the United Kingdom. Prize courts would adjudicate issues like the matter of neutrality and awarding prize money and head money. Prize money and head money in the past encouraged a degree of civility and thrift to war at sea. As an aside, prize courts may not be simply historical. they may still be relevant. An article advocating the return of prize courts appeared in the September 24th issue of Naval Institute Proceedings, entitled Heave to and Prepare to be Boarded, with a subtitle, The U.S. Navy Needs a Legal Framework for Prize Law Suitable for Modern Warfare. If prize courts don't encourage civility, at least I know a prize court will give Navy recruiting numbers a great big boost. This is the sea gates. Okay, the war has been declared. There'll be about a string of a half dozen Japanese victorious campaigns following. The first Japanese war ends in 1895. Japan lists the successful conquest of some very interesting real estate. Let me lay out the new Japanese possessions at the end of the war of the Empire of the Sun. They will become important very shortly. Prominent here are the two hinges of what is known in China as the Sea Gate that protect Peking. Now, if you look at the chart, the yellow sea is sort of diagonally lays across, and you'll see the long dash line. The long dash line at the top in the upper left is the Great Wall of China. If you look down a little farther to the right, that is Liaotung Peninsula, and on the across from it is Shantung Peninsula. And this area between them is known as the Sea Gate. And these two peninsulas are known as the hinges of the Sea Gate that protects Peking, which resides just south of the Great Wall in the left upper side of the chart. So first is ultimately on the far right below the Yalu River is Korea. Japan makes itself suzerain of Korea. That is, makes Korea internally autonomous, but externally a protectorate. In a decade, Japan will make Korea a colony. The second, Japan is first. Korea is first. Then the Lao Peninsula, that sharp bicuspid on the top there, is the Liaotung Peninsula. And it is known as the West Sea Gate Hinge. It's known as the East Sea Gate Hinge. Bounded to the west by the Great Wall, and to the southwest by the Yalu River. Its tip is Port Arthur, a major naval base, one of China's biggest naval bases and shipyards. Below is Japan's third conquest, which is the West Sea Gate Hinge, the Shantung Peninsula, where everybody's going, all the survivors are going back from Pungdo. At Shantung's tip are Chefoo and Wei Hai Wei, which you've heard me mention already, and they maintain major Chinese naval bases and shipyards. The south of them is on the western side of the Yellow Sea is Tsingtao. Now that's the lower half, and you can read it there. It's all go up from the center and just look to the left, center bottom, and look to the left, and that's Tsingtao. And I'll get to Tsingtao later. But these two peninsulas are taken completely. and they are the focus of China's naval strength. Uh, these are the two major. They've been taken by the Japanese. As an outside, as an aside, at the outset of the Sino-Japanese War, Japan had planned on taking Peking in the upper left-hand corner of the chart, northwest of Tientsin, but it forgoes that objective. The battles for the sea gates and control of the Yellow River have cost too much in terms of blood and treasure. The final conquest is Taiwan, which is off the chart to the southeast, your left, and represents a terrible Pyrrhic victory for the Japanese. The battle for Taiwan cost the Japanese 700 casualties by combat dead or wounded. And you ask, well, that's not too bad. The second half is, and they lose 20,000 dead or disabled by disease. Taiwan will remain in Japan's hands until the end of World War II. It will then become the last but ever prospering refuge of the Chinese nationalists. The two sea gates now look like two hands clutching the Qing dynasty's throat, but those conquests won't stand. The Qing dynasty, of course, is the royal Chinese dynasty. Now meet the three members of the selfless tripartite intervention: Germany, Russia, and France, and unofficially Britain. On April 3rd, 1895, Germany, Russia, and France object to the terms of the Treaty of Shimonoseki, which has not yet been signed, and demand Japan give back the two peninsulas, Shantung and Liaotung. They contend Japan's conquest was a disproportionate military response. They didn't use those words. Those are modern words. Essentially, I submit it meant they feared Japan might eventually undercut the Chinese concessions finessed by the other European powers and possibly throw Europeans out of China altogether. Japan reluctantly and painfully abandons the Shantung and Liaotung peninsulas, which they paid for dearly. Not long after the tripartite party gets their way, they tip their hands and exploit a bewildered China. In 1896, when there's a new czar in Russia, Nicholas II, the first intervening partner, Russia, strong arms a 25-year lease of Chinese Manchuria by virtue of its apparent strength and proximity. China, in turn, views Russia as an extremely dangerous neighbor, but it can also be a foil against Japan, because Russia is a recent participant in the Black Boxer Rebellion, was fought in China as a major power, which has successfully used modern weapons and tactics. Russia is the only non-tribute country which has a common border with China. So it's always a little closer to the heart of China than any of its vassals or tribute states. Russia is the world's largest geographical empire and stands third in population to China. So it is a power to take note of. And Russia needs a warm water port on the Pacific and is ready to build the Trans-Siberian Railway. Prior to the Russian lease, Manchurians could live in traditional China, but traditional Chinese could not live in Manchuria. Manchuria has been the Qing dynasty's historical bolt hole since 1644, when the Manchus and the Qing first began to rule China. The unexpected benefit to China is that when the Russians opened their newly leased Manchurian province for immigration by the traditional Chinese, they turned Manchuria from horse country into farm country and a breadbasket. China doesn't have to worry quite so much about food. At the middle of the 19th century, China could not feed its people and was buying food from America. The Han Chinese migration of farmers has opened the steppes of Manchuria with great success. In 1897, the second intervening partner, Germany, uses the murder of two German missionaries as a pretense to seize Tsingtao in 1898, one of the Yellow Sea's best harbors, just by showing up with warships and demanding a 99-year lease. The third intervening party, France, hopes China hobbled by many countries will continue to allow France to hold its Tonkin War booty in Indochina undisturbed. France knows its people don't want another war, not another costly war as the one they just had with China. In 1898, a non-member, Britain, asks for and gets a 25-year lease under similar terms as Russia for Weihai Wei on the Shantung Peninsula. On the left is the Empress Dowager Cixi, and on the right is Emperor Guangxu. There should be a U at the end, not an I. What are the fatal oversights that lose China this war? The first and foremost was Viceroy Li Hongshang, the Dowager Empress Cixi, and the Emperor Hongshu failed to take notice of patient Japan's long interest in the conquest of Korea, dating from the 1868 Meiji Restoration. The Japanese had been encroaching on Korea for 2.5 decades. Inexplicitly, Korea hadn't brought that nibbling to China's attention. China had to have known, but ignored Japan as an inconsequential upstart. They had put down China had put down a half dozen major uprisings against peasants and pitchforks and muskets in China, but they had little appreciation for the fast speed of naval advance of naval technology and how it was progressing in the West and in Japan. Second was the Dowager Empress Cixi failed to notice Grand Tutor Wang was giving the young Emperor Guangxu bad advice while Wang was growing in wealth. When Dowager Cixi retired for the second time, the Grand Tutor Wang secretly told the young new Emperor Guangxu not to waste money on the army and navy and coached him how to keep Dowager Empress Cixi in the dark. By then, Grand Tutor Wang was the president of the Ministry of Revenue, which controlled the purse strings of the Chinese Army and Navy. From 1888 to 1894, the Navy had very little money to operate, train, or acquire more modern ships. During this period, ships of the Chinese Navy rarely went to sea or fired their guns. The broken code. The third oversight was the security of the Minhung diplomacy. It was an OPSEC bead window. Earlier in the Pungdo series, I mentioned how oddly quick Japan responded to every Chinese move. Personally, I make a point of not studying naval history exclusively. I recently came across Jing Su's Kingdom of Characters. Kingdom of Characters was a 2023 Pulitzer Prize finalist. Su's book deals with Chinese language, how the Chinese language is written, and how typewriters of any kind and computers were a particular obstacle for China more than any other country in the world. Her observation is supported by an unclassified okay. Her observation is supported by an unclassified article in the United States National Security Agency publication. That led me to an unclassified analysis speculating the Minhag diplomatic code hadn't been deciphered, it had been stolen or copied. Good story there someplace. Clearly, China was not too large to fail. The West was, however, amazed that underdog Japan, with a population of only 1/10 the size of China's, could prevail so effectively. Despite the Kowshing massacre, the West at the time did not look upon China's embarrassing defeat with complete sympathy. In 1841, John Quincy Adams, sixth president and champion of the Amistad legal case, went on the record about China and the Opium Wars, saying with bitterness, "The opium question is not the cause of the war. The cause of the war is the kowtow, the arrogant and insupportable pretension of China that she will hold commercial intercourse with the rest of mankind, not upon the terms of equal reciprocity, but on the insulting and degrading form of lord and vassal." And somewhere in there, he talks about, uses the word kowtowing. To be fair, Westerners, by the time the Dowager Empress Cixi and Regent came into power, Westerners were no longer required to kowtow. But like every Westerner, they couldn't look upon Cixi directly. But like everyone else, Westerners could not look upon her directly during official meetings. She stayed behind a yellow silk curtain. Occasionally, there are entities that are too large to fail. If those entities are further protected by good timing and exceptional skill, they won't fail. However, China's arrogant inattention to Japanese periodic subversions of Korea's sovereignty dating back to 1868, the lack of operational security using the same diplomatic code for 2 decades, and the loss of the code, and China's 6-year shutdown of the Navy. These failures left China beaten before the first troop movement. It had been beaten using Sun Tzu, China's greatest general's bag of tricks. Now, going back to the series, the original issue of the series, could we have negotiated Japan in a way to prevent the Pearl Harbor attack? My naval order, New York City chapter shipmate Dale Jenkins, in his book Diplomats and Admirals, posits that we could have negotiated with Japan and prevented war in 1941. I submit that Japan, as a matter of pattern and practice, over 50 years used negotiation to divert attention and buy time for significant aggression. but it doesn't matter. Dale and I are friends, and well, difference of opinion is what makes horse races. So, Fred, we can either do the commercial and the QR code, or we can entertain questions.
Well, we have a couple minutes, so why don't we do the last couple of shies? I mean, everybody wants to see you with a full head of black hair, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Brown hair.
Brown hair. It's hard to tell in the photo. So why don't we go to the next? You got a couple more slides, right?
Yep.
One we can put in. Let's talk about. And again, you can get the Abalone Ukulele. It's a great read, as was the Jade Rooster. And I recommend both of them as quick, fast-paced reads. And we're looking forward to the next installment in the series, right?
That's right. That's right. It's a master class in historical fiction, says Joseph Williams, who is a great naval historian of nonfiction. But I take that as a high flattery, high talk. And here is the QR code for those of you who want to order it using your computer, but you can also get it through Barnes and Noble and, of course, Amazon. And this is my Gomapsiam Nida. Thank you from a raider. That's a team, Korean team of the Seonhae Yellow Sea. Once a long time ago, aboard a motor junk off Incheon, not far north of Pungdo. So, if there are any questions.
Okay, so the first question up is more of a comment from our commander Bob Thompson. He says there seem to be critical lessons from the presentation that can be applied to the environment we find ourselves in today. Well, I imagine anybody who's been watching the 3 presentations is kind of getting that.
It surely crossed my mind. Just substitute China, reverse characters.
Right.
Whatever Japan did, China is doing now. And ever since in my opinion, since the Clinton administration, they've been stealing our lunch.
So, as a lawyer, that comment takes me to the 100-year plan. As an ensign, and you and I are like the same year group, I attended a secret brief about China's 100-year plan. And at that time it was approximately year 25. And it was just mind-boggling how well they had stayed the course for all of 25 years. Well, that was 50 years ago. And if you look at where China is now at year 75, anybody who's not aware of that plan, especially in our Department of Defense and Department of State, and isn't taking every measure possible to protect ourselves from the implications of how well Chinese is tracked for now 75 years, despite the Cultural Revolution, despite the great famines, despite all the turnovers, they're on target. Are you aware of that plan? Have you had any thoughts on, we're not solving political problems here, but it sounds like a lot of the lessons learned from their experience with the Japanese starting in the incident in Pungdo Bay, the Chinese have really taken to heart.
Well, there was legislation before the Clintons where any sort of technology had to be first, that went overseas, had to be reviewed by the Department of Defense. And then that got lifted. Well, our current computer knowledge really went out the door. And it was naive to think that as soon as the Chinese learned about capitalism, they'd mellow and they'd be just like us.
Right.
And the trouble is, you've got the Chinese did give us Sun Tzu, and then everything that we have happened to us that's strange. I'm always saying, "Oh boy, I think that's a Sun Tzu trick," and I'm getting more and more watchful. But I think all of that can be remedied. I mean, things haven't gone too far.
Right. Bob just posted the recent book by Michael Pillsbury about the 100-year marathon. I was very reassured. I was getting to the point where I thought maybe I had just dreamed having heard about that 100-year plan. So let's see. I'm looking for additional. He shared
I
a link.
see questions. Somebody calling me a professor. I'm a captain. That's good enough. But I speak about the first semester level in Japanese and Korean, and I could read and write both as long as it didn't get into the Chinese ideograms, which aren't phonetic. And so I wouldn't dare at this time try and get direct historical documents in their original languages and work out what they're saying. I have to confess, most of my history work in the Far East is secondary sources, but I do know a lot of the better books in that area.
Have you tried use Google Translate with any larger texts?
No, I haven't. As I said, it'd be really interesting to see if you can use one of. See, to be literate in Chinese, you've got to know about 5,000 different characters.
Yeah.
And I don't know what they use for a dictionary, but the characters aren't in any particular order. So if you want to look up something, you got your job cut out for you. Japanese, Korean, they're syllabaries. In other words, instead of having a consonant and a vowel and switching them all around, consonants and vowels, they have syllables. So it's a consonant and a vowel in Japanese and Korean. And their alphabet is something like 28 to 30 in Korean. And Japan has two alphabets. They're the same. And they just look different. And they're about 28 or 32. And and you can just sound them out. If you know the sounds, you know the 28 sounds, you can say them aloud and say, I know that word. And they can lay out a dictionary because there's an order. But Chinese, I'm sure a computer could do it. In fact, computers may be the savior of China. They can use a typewriter of some sort, and it'll pick out one of the 5,000 ideograms.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. Let's come back to the battle. One, you mentioned that the Japanese started firing at the swimmers. Was that part of the order of the battles? Was that part of their standard tactics?
Okay.
Take no prisoners.
When the Japanese went into the Yellow Sea at that point, well, there's a couple other facts. I couldn't get it all into the time limit, but at this time, when the Chinese ships leave Asan, the capital of Seoul has been taken by the Japanese, and they're holding the king and the queen.
Right.
So the war is about to happen, and Togo is ordered to seize the Yellow Sea. He and a bunch of other ships, something called the Flying Squadron. So they were already at war. It was just a matter. In fact, it'd been a war all along, but it was the first time shots were fired. But it wasn't a mistake. The only mistake was China had such poor intelligence that they thought they could get along with the Japan if they just didn't take the first shot. The same thing happened with the Russians in Port Arthur. They get attacked by the Japanese there, and they've got the same orders. Don't fire on the Japanese. We don't want to give them an excuse. Well, they go in and they sink two of the biggest ships in the harbor at Port Arthur with torpedoes.
Right. Yeah, I know the Japanese just ate the Russians' lunch in Port Arthur. Definitely that. Now, you mentioned that a German gunboat showed up, what is it, 1 or 2 days after the battle? And how is it the Japanese didn't harass them?
Now, it's very interesting. And I'm not sure why. Now, the pickups within, everybody gets away to a 1.5 mile island, and they all get picked up. It is interesting. It could be the Japanese are very touchy. So, geez, we don't want to get too many people mad. But it also is strange that the British and German and French ships get into a war zone. There's firing, there's ships blowing up. I got an idea these were intelligence shadows, and they just kind of watched, and they just risked getting some real information from the survivors and understanding what was going on. But it is strange that 3 countries are walking up into 2 other countries' war in the 10-inch guns. Yeah, they could have been hit.
Right. That's the thing. Maybe, again, because when I look at early 20th century relationships between Britain and the Japanese, they seem to be remarkably cozy.
They seem to be
remarkably cozy.
Oh, yeah. Well, the Japanese and there'll be a treaty in something like 1902.
Right.
And when the Russians come through from the Baltic by England, the English ships harass them during their cruise from the Baltic all the way to the Straits of Tsushima.
Right.
But also, they can't get coal. All the coaling stations in the Pacific and all the telegraphic undersea lines are British, and the British locked them out of that. What the Russians have to do is they hire, I cannot remember which country, it may have been the U.S., for coaling, and they get coaled in the middle of the Indian Ocean on their way to the Straits of Tsushima.
There was a fascinating article about that. I think it was in Naval History magazine, maybe a year or 2 ago, about the poor Russian admiral, he just, was strung out. Talk about overextended lines, logistic lines. By the
Yeah,
time he got up to Port Arthur, he was not
he
in any position to fight a battle.
well, you may have recognized the name. The Togo at Pungdo is the same Togo who is admiral of the Japanese fleet at the Straits of Tsushima.
Well,
He
that's what I thought. But he must have been pretty old by then, though.
well, admirals tend to be.
They tend to be, well, but old is relative. And now
But
you see admirals with license plates, Naval Academy 82. Um, it's scary. Well, we're coming up to the top of the hour. I've found this fascinating journey in three parts, and I appreciate your willingness to keep coming back to, bring us along to the story, and that connection. I think it can't be overemphasized between how the Japanese began their incursion into Korea, China, and then the launch of World War II. It's almost a straight line, and when you think about it, it's only 35, 40 years, and which is a blink. I mean, it's more than 40 years since the Berlin Wall came down, and we see what pendulum has swung with our relationship with our friends in Russia. Um, I don't think we're singing "Kumbaya" that much anymore. Um, so everybody, I'm still working on a speaker for January, and until I have a speaker, I don't want to lock in a date because I want to give my presenters a certain amount of flexibility. But look for announcements in the All Know Us Monday morning broadcast emails and on the Continental website. And if you're a LinkedIn subscriber, become a member of the the Naval Order Group or the Continental Commandery Group or both. And we'll be putting out word just as soon as I have it. Again, Roger, want to express my appreciation. A great job. Fascinating, long ago, but not particularly ancient history with lots of lessons to which we should be paying attention today. Oh, there's Sunday's New York Times Magazine, an article about a naval war game. And as I'm reading, I realized, oh, I was participant in that game. I was a French lieutenant commander. I was went up there to participate during. I thought I would escape Houston heat by going to Washington D.C. for a couple of weeks, and it was hotter and more humid in Washington for the entire 2 weeks than it had been in Houston during that time. At any rate, we'll see everybody next month. I wish everybody a wonderful holiday season, a healthy, prosperous new year, and we'll see you in January 2025. Mark, take it away.